The year was 2387. The Grand Assembly Hall on the Council World of Everin was full. Delegates from 73 species filled the long, curved benches. The light from 3 suns came through the glass dome above them. The air smelled of old stone and burning oil from the Yelthari lamps. It was a quiet day. It was the day the galaxy would change forever, though most of the people in that room did not know it yet. At the front of the hall stood the High Speaker of the Vorith. He was tall and reptilian, with green scales and bright yellow eyes. His name was Heskal, and he had worked on this treaty for 30 years. Today was the day he would see his life's work signed into law. The treaty was called the Treaty of Silent Steel. It would ban every weapon known to the galaxy. Every gun. Every plasma lance. Every neural disruptor. Every bomb. Every blade. All of it would be gone. The galaxy would finally be at peace. Heskal looked across the hall. He saw the proud faces of the old species. The Yelthari, with their soft glowing skin. The Drovan, tall and silver. The Threx, who moved in groups like insects. And then, in the very back row, he saw the humans. There were only 2 of them. They sat alone. No one had wanted to sit near them. The humans were the newest members of the council. They had been allowed to join only 10 years ago. Most of the older species still did not trust them. The humans were small. They were soft. They lived only 100 years or so. And they came from a planet that had been at war with itself for most of its history. Some species called them the Bleeding Apes. The 2 humans were Ambassador Daniel Carter and his aide, Lieutenant Megan Holloway. Carter was a man from the state of Ohio. He had served as a diplomat for 30 years. His hair was gray at the sides. He wore a plain dark suit. Holloway sat beside him. She was younger, sharp-eyed, and quiet. She had a thick folder of papers on her lap. No one paid any attention to them. The High Speaker began to read the treaty out loud. The words went on for nearly 2 hours. The treaty listed every kind of weapon. It listed every kind of warship. It listed every kind of armor and every kind of tool used to harm. Each delegate would have to sign at the end. Each species would have to give up its arms within 5 years. Any species that broke the treaty would be removed from the council and placed under blockade. It was the boldest peace treaty in the history of the galaxy. As Heskal read, Lieutenant Holloway began to take notes. She wrote quickly. Her face grew more and more still. After a while, she leaned over to Carter and whispered something in his ear. Carter nodded. He looked down at his hands. Then he looked up again and watched the High Speaker finish his speech. When Heskal was done, he asked if any delegate had a question. Most of the species had already agreed in private. The vote was only a formality. But Holloway raised her hand. The hall went quiet. Heads turned. A human, asking a question. It was almost rude. Heskal blinked his yellow eyes. The human delegation may speak, he said in his cold, dry voice. Holloway stood up. She was not nervous. She spoke clearly. High Speaker, she said, the treaty lists every weapon known to your records. But it does not say what a weapon is. It only lists the things you call weapons. Could the speaker explain the definition? There was a soft sound across the hall. A few of the Drovan laughed. A Yelthari made a 3-note hum that meant amusement. Heskal smiled with his sharp teeth. A weapon, young human, is any tool built for the purpose of harm. That is the simple meaning. The treaty does not need to repeat what every child knows. Holloway nodded politely. Thank you, High Speaker. She sat down. She did not say anything else. Carter did not say anything either. The hall moved on. The vote was held. The treaty passed without a single objection. Every delegate, one by one, walked to the front and pressed their hand or claw or tentacle to the Great Seal. Carter walked up too, in his quiet way, and pressed his thumb to the stone. The treaty was law. The galaxy cheered. That night, in the human embassy on Everin, Daniel Carter sat with General Owen Marshall in a small wood-paneled room. There was a bottle of bourbon on the table between them. Marshall was a heavy man with a short gray beard and tired eyes. He had flown in from Earth 2 days before. He had read the treaty 3 times on the trip. Now he read it again, slowly, while Carter poured the drinks. After a long time, Marshall set the paper down. He looked at Carter. Then he began to laugh. It was a soft laugh at first. Then a longer one. He shook his head. "Daniel," he said, "do you see what they have done?" Carter smiled and took a slow sip from his glass. "I see it. They banned every weapon," Marshall said. "Every single one. Plasma. Kinetic. Neural. Chemical. Even blades. They listed them all. They did not miss a thing." "No," Carter said. "They missed one thing." Marshall pointed at the paper with one thick finger. "They never once said the word soldier. They never once said the word ship that carries soldiers. They never once said the word body. The treaty does not mention us. It only mentions the things we hold. They have banned the gun and forgotten the hand." Carter set down his glass. He looked out the window. The 3 sons of Everin had gone down. Only stars were left. He thought about the long history of his people. He thought about every cave, every battlefield, every long march in the rain. He thought about the men who had crossed mountains with nothing but blades and bread. He thought about the women who had built rifles in cold factories during the Great Wars. He thought about all of it. And he thought about how, for 200,000 years, his species had been learning, slowly and quietly, how to kill without anything in its hands at all. "They will find out," Marshall said softly. "Sooner or later, someone will push us. And they will find out." Carter nodded. "Then let it be later," he said. "And let it be small. Let it be one outpost. One small place where someone is rude. Let it be a quiet lesson, not a loud one." They sat for a long time after that, drinking in the dark. Marshall poured another round. He stared at the dark window for a while. Then he asked, almost to himself, what kind of order they should send to Earth. Carter shook his head slowly. He said no order at all. The Pentagon already knew. The President already knew. They had read the same treaty. They had drawn the same line under the same missing words. No new order was needed. The training would not change. The schools would still teach the old skills. The marches would still happen at dawn. The cold drills in the snow would still be run. The long swims in the dark water would still be done. Everything would go on, quietly, as it always had, only now without the bullets at the end of it. And that, Marshall said, was the most terrible thing of all. Far above them, the stars wheeled across the dome of Everin. Far away, on a frozen rock at the edge of human space, a small science station was settling in for the night. Its lights were small against the snow. Its people had no weapons. The treaty had seen to that. They were safe by law. They were safe by the word of 73 species. They slept well that night. They did not know that, 3 months later, the Vorith would come and try to push them off their rock. And the galaxy would begin to learn what a human really was. Kessel 9 was a small frozen world at the edge of human space. It had a thin nitrogen atmosphere, 2 pale moons, and a surface that was nothing but ice and black rock. The wind never stopped. The temperature never rose above -70. Nothing grew there. Nothing should have lived there. But the Americans had built a small science station on the South Plain, and 12 researchers were now its only humans. The station was led by Dr. Caroline Whitman, a tall, quiet woman from the state of Maine. She had been on Kessel 9 for 4 years. She liked the cold. 3 kilometers to the east, on the same ice plain, the Vorith had built a mining outpost. They were after a rare crystal that grew deep in the black rock. The crystals were worth a great deal of money on the trade routes. The Vorith outpost was bigger than the human station. It had heated towers, blast walls, and a small fleet of dig machines. It was run by a Vorith named Govrak. He was a younger cousin of the High Speaker, Heskal. Govrak was loud, proud, and bored. He thought the humans were a joke. Over the past few weeks, the Vorith had been pushing their dig site slowly toward the human border. Each day a little more. Each week the line moved a few more meters west. They sent loud machines past midnight to wake the human station. They dumped waste rock onto the edge of the human claim. They sent rude messages over the open radio band. Govrak knew the humans had no weapons. The treaty had taken them away. So he saw no reason to be polite. Dr. Whitman sent 3 formal complaints to the council. The council was slow. The council was always slow. The complaint sat in some office on Everin while Govrak laughed and pushed the line another meter west. Then, one morning, an old Yelthari adjudicator arrived in a small black ship. Her name was Verolen. She was nearly 400 years old. Her skin glowed a soft blue in the cold light. She had come to look into the dispute. She would speak to both sides and write a report. She landed first at the Vorith camp. Govrak gave her a feast. He laughed and told her the humans were soft creatures who would soon leave on their own. Verolen listened, said little, and ate little. Then she came to the human station. Whitman met her at the airlock. The 2 women, one human and one Yelthari, sat in the small mess hall over weak tea. Verolen asked what the humans planned to do. She expected the answer to be a long list of legal papers. She expected requests, petitions, and demands. Whitman set her cup down. She said she would like to walk over and speak to Govrak in person. That was all. Just a small visit. With no weapons. With no shouting. Just a few words across a table. Verolen blinked her soft blue eyes. She thought it was strange. But she could not say no. Under council law, peaceful visits between neighbors were always allowed. She gave her permission and asked to come along to watch. The next morning was the coldest day of the year. The wind was so strong it could knock a person off their feet. The thermometer read -82. Whitman put on a thermal coat and thick boots. She did not put on a heated suit. None of her people did. She picked 5 of her best researchers. 3 men and 2 women. They were all Americans. They were all quiet. They had all spent years in cold places before this. One of them, a young man named Ben Foster, had once walked across part of Antarctica alone. They stepped out of the airlock at dawn. The wind hit them like a wall. Verolen watched from her warm ship. She thought they would turn back within 10 minutes. They did not. They walked across the open ice in a slow, steady line. They did not speak. They did not stop. Their breath made white clouds that the wind tore away in seconds. Their faces grew red, then white, then a strange dark color. Their eyebrows froze. Their lashes froze. They kept walking. From the Vorith towers, the guards watched through their lenses. They laughed at first. Then they stopped laughing. Then they called Govrak. Govrak came up to the watch room and stared. He had seen humans before, but he had never seen this. The cold should have killed them. The wind should have broken them. They were still coming. It took 4 hours. The humans crossed all 3 kilometers on foot. When they reached the Vorith gate, their thermal coats were stiff with ice. Their hands were the color of stone. But their eyes were calm. Whitman walked up to the gate guard and asked, in a polite voice, to speak with the governor. The guard did not know what to say. He opened the gate. Inside the warm chamber, Govrak waited. He sat on a tall stone seat. 20 of his workers stood around him with stun rods in their belts. The stun rods were legal under the treaty because they were used for animal control, not for combat. Govrak hoped he might need to use one. He hoped the humans would shout. He hoped they would beg. He grinned with his sharp green teeth as Whitman stepped in. Whitman did not shout. She did not beg. She walked across the warm stone floor with her 5 people behind her. She stopped at the table in front of Govrak. She did not sit down. She placed one bare red hand flat on the table. The skin was cracked. There was a little blood on her knuckles. She did not seem to notice. Verolen had come in behind them and was watching from the side. She would remember this moment for the rest of her life. The room was very quiet. Whitman spoke in a low, even voice. She said she was sorry to come unannounced. She said the weather had been hard on her station. She said her people had work to do and could not be disturbed. She said the Vorith dig line had moved 12 meters into her claim. She asked, kindly, if the governor would move it back by sunset. Govrak laughed. The laugh was loud and a little too long. He said no. He said the humans had no right to give orders. He said the dig would go where he wanted it to go. He said the humans should be glad he had not pushed them off the planet already. Whitman nodded slowly, as if she had expected this. Then she leaned forward a little. She did not raise her voice. She did not move her hand. She only said one thing. She said that the next Vorith survey team that crossed the line would not come home. She said it the way a person says that water is wet. She did not look angry. She did not look afraid. She only looked tired. Then she turned. She and her 5 people walked out of the chamber. They walked back through the gate. They walked back across the 3 kilometers of ice. The wind was worse on the way home. The sun was low. None of them spoke. Behind them, Govrak stood in his warm chamber with his mouth a little open. He looked at his workers. The workers looked at the floor. None of them met his eyes. None of them laughed. He sat down slowly on his tall stone seat. He told one of the workers to bring him a drink. The worker hurried away. Govrak waited a long time before he drank. His hand shook a little when he raised the cup. He did not know why. That night, back at the human station, Whitman sat in the small mess hall with bandages on her hands. Verolen sat across from her. The old Yelthari poured the tea this time. She asked Whitman a quiet question. She asked why the humans had walked. Why not send a written warning? Why not stay warm? Whitman thought for a moment. Then she said that words on paper could be torn up, but a person who has walked through 80 below cannot be forgotten. She said her people had not come to threaten anyone. They had only come to be seen. That was all. And Verolen, who had seen many things in her 400 years, walked out into the cold and did not feel the cold at all. She felt something else. She did not yet have a word for it. But she knew, deep in her old Yelthari heart, that something had just changed in the galaxy. And that nothing would ever be quite the same again. 1 year passed after the long walk on Kessel 9. In that year, the galaxy began to feel strange. No one could say why at first. It was a small feeling, like a cold draft in a warm room. But it grew. And it grew. It started with small stories. A Vorith trader on the trade world of Belmir tried to cheat a human captain out of a shipment of grain. The trader laughed in the human's face. He said the humans had no weapons. He said there was nothing they could do. The next morning, when the trader went to open his shop, all of his shipping crates were stacked in a perfect square in the middle of the main square of the city. Not broken. Not stolen. Just moved. A note sat on top. It said, in 3 languages, that the human captain had paid the full bill from the trader's own bank account that night. The bank could not explain how. The trader paid the humans back the next day. He did not laugh again. Then it was the Krelthi. The Krelthi were a small pirate species that had survived the treaty by hiding their ships in old asteroid belts. They lived by raiding cargo lanes. One day, a Krelthi pirate ship found a human freighter near the Helios belt. The freighter was old and slow. Its crew was small. The pirates boarded with stun rods and ropes. 3 days later, a council patrol found the pirate ship drifting in space. The hull was fine. The life support was fine. The food was fine. The cargo of the freighter was untouched. But the pirate crew was gone. Every one of them. There was no blood. There were no signs of fighting. The boots of the pirate captain were still on the bridge, still laced. The patrol could find no clue. The story spread fast. After that, no Krelthi ship ever again moved on a human flag. Not one. Ever. Then it was the Droven. The Droven were tall, silver, and proud. Their ambassador to Earth was a high-born noble named Drelthane. He flew to Earth for a state visit. He was a guest of the American president for 3 days. On the second day, during a quiet tour of the Lincoln Memorial in the city of Washington, Drelthane stopped in front of the great stone statue. He looked up at it for a long time. He read the words on the wall. He did not move for nearly an hour. The American guide stood next to him and said nothing. At the end of the day, Drelthane went back to his ship and asked to be flown home that night. He never came back to Earth again. He never said why. The Drovan ambassador's seat on Earth stayed empty for 6 years. Then it was the Threks. The Threks were a swarm species. They moved together in groups of thousands. They were not really one mind, but they were not really many either. A swarm of Threks scouts had been following a human colony ship for 6 weeks across the Outer Rim. The colony ship was full of farmers and children. It carried no escort. The Threks had every chance to take it. They never did. After 6 weeks, the swarm simply peeled away and went home. When the Threks queen was asked why, she would not answer. She only said that the colony ship had seemed very tired and that it was not their place to add to its troubles. No one knew what that meant. But the story spread. Other stories followed. A Yelthari poet wrote a song about the humans. The song spread across a dozen worlds. In the song, the humans were not painted as monsters. They were painted as a quiet old people, walking through the galaxy with empty hands, asking very little, but also asking to be left alone. The song was sad. It was also a warning. On Everin, in the Grand Assembly, the older species began to whisper. The whispers grew into a roar. At the front of the worry was the High Speaker himself, Heskal. He had spent 30 years building the Treaty of Silent Steel. He had dreamed of a peaceful galaxy. Now, he believed, his treaty had failed. He believed the humans were a kind of weapon that no one had thought to ban. And he wanted to fix the mistake. Heskal called for a special hearing. He filed a formal petition. The petition asked the Council to classify humans themselves as a banned weapon. The petition asked for humans to be confined to their home solar system, Sol. They would not be allowed to travel beyond it. They would not be allowed to trade beyond it. They would not be allowed to land on any other world. In short, the petition asked the galaxy to put the humans back in their box and lock the door. The petition was signed by the Vorith High Conclave. It was signed by the Drovan Federation. It was quietly signed by what was left of the Krelthi. Other species were thinking about it. The hearing was set for the spring session on Everin. The whole galaxy would watch. On Earth, the news of the petition came at noon, local time, in the city of Washington. The President of the United States was a woman named Lillian Park. She was the daughter of a school teacher and a small-town doctor. She had been president for 2 years. She was not loud. She was not famous. She had won her election by less than 1 million votes. But she was sharp, and she was patient, and she had read every page of the Treaty of Silent Steel before she signed her own name to it. She called for a single televised speech that evening. She wore a plain dark suit. She did not stand at a tall podium. She sat at her desk in the Oval Office, with the flag behind her. She looked into the camera. She did not raise her voice. She spoke for only 4 minutes. She said that Earth had heard about the petition. She said the United States, and all of humanity, would attend the hearing in good faith. She said that whatever the Council decided would be respected. She said that the human people had never asked to be feared. They had only asked to be left alone. They had only asked for a small place in the stars, and the right to walk their own path. She said she hoped the Council would remember that. Then she said good night and signed off. The speech was watched on 300 worlds. It was watched in Vorith homes and in Yelthari schools. It was watched by Drovan elders and by Threks queens. Children watched it. Old soldiers watched it. The words were simple. The voice was soft. But many of the people who watched felt the same strange feeling they had felt during the Krelthi story, and the Drovan tour, and the song of the Yelthari poet. It was a small cold draft in a warm room. And the room was the whole galaxy. In the Pentagon, late that same night, General Owen Marshall stood by a window with a glass in his hand. He was older now. His beard was almost white. Daniel Carter was on a transport heading back to Everin. He would arrive in 3 days. With him would go Megan Holloway, who who was no longer a lieutenant. She was a colonel now. They would carry no documents. They would carry no aides. They would carry no security. They would walk into the Grand Assembly as they had walked in the first time, and they would sit in the same back row. And they would wait. Marshall looked out at the lights of the city. He took a slow sip of his drink. He smiled a very small smile. He thought about the long human history. He thought about every quiet thing his people had ever done. He thought about the song the Yelthari had written and the way Drelthane had stared at the statue of Lincoln. And he thought, very quietly, that the hearing on Everin was not going to go the way Heskal hoped. The galaxy was about to learn the last lesson. And after this one, there would not need to be another. Spring came to Everin. The 3 suns were warm again. The trees around the Grand Assembly Hall pushed out new silver leaves. The day of the hearing arrived, and the great dome was packed. Every species was present. Every public seat was full. The side galleries held thousands of viewers. Outside, in the wide stone square, even more had gathered to watch on the big screens. The whole galaxy was watching. The whole galaxy was waiting. At the front of the hall, the 73 high seats of the council sat in a long curved row. The high speaker, Heskal, sat in the tallest one. He wore a long green robe with silver trim. His face was still and proud. He had waited a long time for this day. He believed it would be the day he saved the galaxy from a mistake he himself had made. The humans entered together. There were only 2 of them. Ambassador Daniel Carter walked in first. He wore the same plain dark suit he had worn 10 years ago. He was a little grayer now, a little slower in the step. Behind him came Colonel Megan Holloway. Her hair was tied back. She wore a simple service uniform with no ribbons. Neither of them carried a folder. Neither of them carried a screen. They had no aides with them. No guards. No one. They walked down the long aisle in the soft light, and the whole hall watched them in silence. They sat in the back row, in the same 2 seats they had sat in before. Heskal stood up. He spoke for nearly an hour. He spoke in a strong, clear voice. He told the hall about the traitor on Belmere. He told them about the missing pirates in the Helios belt. He told them about Drelthane in front of the stone statue. He told them about the swarm that had peeled away from the colony ship. He told them about 100 other small stories that had come in over the past year. Each story was true. Each story was small. But together, he said, they made a pattern. And the pattern was clear. He said that the treaty had banned every weapon in the galaxy. But it had not banned the humans. And the humans, he said, were a weapon all on their own. Their bodies were a weapon. Their eyes were a weapon. Their long quiet walks across the ice were a weapon. Their silence in warm rooms was a weapon. Their songs and their stories and even their president's soft televised speech were all weapons. He asked the council to do what it should have done 10 years ago. He asked the council to lock the humans inside their own solar system. For the safety, he said, of every other people in the galaxy. He sat down. There was a long silence. No one clapped. No one called out. Many of the older delegates looked at the floor. Some looked at the humans in the back row. The humans looked back, calmly, with no anger and no fear. Then Daniel Carter stood up. He walked slowly down the long aisle to the speaker's stone. He placed both hands on the stone. He looked across the hall. He did not look at Heskal. He looked at the smaller species in the side galleries. He looked at the young pages who were carrying water and notes. He looked at a Yelthari child in the second row who was watching with wide eyes. He spoke for only 4 minutes. He spoke softly. He said that he had read the treaty many times. He said that humanity had not fired a single shot in all the years since the treaty was signed. He said that no human ship had ever crossed a forbidden border. He said no human had ever attacked a person of another species. He said the traitor on Belmere had been paid back his cheated grain by sundown. He said the pirate ship in the Helios belt had been raided by people the patrol had never identified, and there was no proof that those people had been human. He said Drelthane had been free to leave Earth at any time, and he had left of his own choice. He said the Threk swarm had peeled away on its own, without any contact at all. Then he paused. He looked up at Heskal. He spoke again. He said that the High Speaker was right about one thing. He said that many beings across the galaxy were now afraid of humans. He said he was sorry for that. He said no human had ever wanted to be feared. He said fear, however, was not the same thing as harm. He said a person who is afraid of a mirror has not been hurt by the mirror. He said the mirror has only shown them their own face. Then he said thank you, very politely, and walked back to his seat. He sat down next to Holloway. He did not say anything else. There was another long silence. Heskal looked unhappy. He had expected anger. He had expected a fight. He had not expected this. He moved to call the vote. But just then, a small soft voice came from the side gallery. An old Yelthari stood up. It was Verolen. She was older now. Her blue skin was paler. She asked the council for permission to speak. The speaker could not refuse a sitting adjudicator. He nodded with a tight mouth. Verolen walked down the aisle slowly. She placed her hands on the stone. She did not look at notes. She spoke from her own memory. She told the hall about the long walk on Kessel 9. She told them about the wind, and the cold, and the 6 humans who had walked 3 kilometers in -80 without a heated suit. She told them about Whitman placing her bare red hand on the table. She told them about the words Whitman had spoken in her low even voice. She told them about Govrak's mouth hanging open, and his workers staring at the floor. She told them about the tea afterward, and about Whitman's quiet answer when she had asked why the humans had walked. She told the hall, word for word, what Whitman had said. That words on paper can be torn up. But a person who has walked through 80 below cannot be forgotten. Then Verolen lifted her old eyes and looked at Heskal. She said something that the whole galaxy would remember for the rest of its history. She said the humans had not threatened anyone. They had only been present. And presence, she said, was not a weapon. It was a mirror. The Vorith on the ice that day had not been afraid of the humans. The Vorith had been afraid of what the humans had shown them about themselves. That, she said, was the truth of every story Heskal had brought to this hall today. The humans were not the weapon. The mirror was. And you do not punish a mirror for showing a face. She stepped down. The hall was so silent that the soft scrape of her old feet on the stone could be heard in every row. She walked back to her seat. She did not look at the humans. The humans did not look at her. Then the vote was called. Each delegate pressed a small light. Yes for the petition. No against it. The lights filled the great board above the speaker's chair, one by one, in red and green. The room held its breath. 41 green. 29 red. 3 abstaining. The petition failed. The humans would not be classified as a weapon. They would not be locked away in soul. They would stay free. They would stay among the stars. But every delegate in that hall understood, in a deeper way than they had understood before, exactly what kind of people they had let in the door 10 years ago. Heskal sat very still in his tall green chair. He did not speak again that day. He looked at the humans in the back row. They had already stood up. They were walking quietly out of the hall, side by side, with no celebration and no smile. And as the great doors closed behind them, the whole galaxy let out a long slow breath, all at once, like the breath of a person who has just stepped back from the edge of a cliff. The years after the hearing on Everin were strange and quiet. The galaxy did not know, at first, how to live in the new shape of things. The old fears were still there. The old pride was still there. But no one wanted to be the next Heskal. No one wanted to stand in the Grand Assembly and ask the council to punish a mirror. So people grew careful. They grew polite. And in time, they grew used to it. Historians later called this time the Quiet Era. For 100 years, no weapon was fired anywhere in known space. No ship was ever boarded. No border was ever crossed by force. Trade grew. Crops grew. Cities grew. The council added new member species, slowly, 1 or 2 a decade. The hall grew larger. The list of seats grew longer. By the end of the century, 91 species sat under the great glass dome of Evren. And in every quiet corner of every world, you would find at least one American. They were not soldiers. They were not generals. They were teachers, traders, doctors, farmers, engineers, and small-town diplomats. They wore plain clothes. They carried no weapons. They smiled at the children of other species and learned their songs. They sat at long state dinners and made small jokes. They asked thoughtful questions during trade talks. They were liked. They were welcomed. They were also, very quietly, watched. Every host world made sure their American visitors were happy and well fed. Every host world made sure that no rude thing was ever said in their hearing. Every host world remembered, in the back of its mind, the story of the long walk on Kessel 9. Earth grew, too. 3 permanent seats on every major council committee. A trade network that reached every member world. Schools full of children who studied alien languages as easily as their own. The American flag flew on 100 friendly ports across the galaxy. And not once, in all those years, did anyone ever raise a hand against it. Dr. Caroline Whitman, who had walked across the ice on Kessel 9, lived to be 92. Her small science station grew into a city of 3,000 people. She was the first mayor. She served for 20 years, then stepped down. She wrote a short book about the cold and the silence. She did not write about the walk. She said the walk did not need a book. She said the walk had already written itself into the galaxy. She died in her sleep one winter night. Her grave is on the south plain of Kessel 9, near the spot where she once placed her bare red hand on a stone table. Megan Holloway became a general. She served for 30 more years. She trained 2 generations of young officers. She taught them the old skills, the ones that did not need any weapon at all. She taught them how to walk for a long time in hard places. She taught them how to sit very still in warm rooms. She taught them how to listen, and how to be silent, and how to say only what needed to be said. She told them, again and again, that the strength of their people was not in any tool. It was in the body, and the eye, and the long memory. She retired in the end to a small house on the coast of Maine, where she had been born. She lived there alone, with a dog and a porch and a long view of the sea. She watched the news of the galaxy from her old wood chair, and she rarely spoke. When she died, the President of the United States flew up to her funeral in person. The President was a young woman, the granddaughter of Lillian Park. She stood by the grave in the rain and said almost nothing. And Daniel Carter, the man who had first signed the treaty all those years ago, lived the longest of all. He served as ambassador to Everin for 40 more years. He grew old in the same back row of the Grand Assembly. The new delegates of the new species would come up to him, one by one, and shake his hand or his tentacle or his claw, and ask him how he was. He always smiled. He always answered the same way. He always said he was very well, thank you, and how were the children at home? They always said the children were fine. And he always nodded as if this was the most important answer in the galaxy. Maybe it was. Near the end of his life, he made one last trip. He went back to Kessel 9. He was over 100 years old by then, and the doctors had told him not to go. He went anyway. He arrived on a small ship in late winter. The wind was hard. The light was thin. The old Vorith mining outpost had been gone for 60 years, but its ruins still stood on the eastern plain. Carter asked the small mayor of Whitman City to take him out there in a heated rover. Waiting for him, by the ruins, was an old Vorith. His green scales were almost gray now. His yellow eyes were dim. It was Govrak. Carter had asked him to come, and Govrak had come. The 2 old men stood together for a long time on the ice, with the wind tugging at their coats and their hoods. Neither spoke. They walked, very slowly, along the old broken wall of the outpost. They walked the way the 6 humans had walked, all those years ago, only in the other direction. They walked across part of the 3 kilometers. At last Govrak stopped. He was breathing hard. He looked at Carter with his old yellow eyes. He asked the question he had carried for 40 years. He asked why the humans had never struck back. Not on Kessel 9. Not at the hearing. Not in all the years after. They had had every reason. They had had every right. And they had never lifted a hand. Why? Carter looked at him for a long moment. He looked at the broken wall, and the ice, and the dark line of the human city far away to the west. He thought about all the long quiet years. He thought about Whitman, and Holloway, and Marshall, and all the others who were gone now. He thought about a Yelthari song he had heard a long time ago. He thought about every walk his people had ever made, in every cold place, in every old time. Then he said, very quietly, that they had not needed to. He said that a hand that does not need to be lifted is a stronger hand than one that does. He said that his people had made one promise to themselves a very long time ago. They had promised that they would always be the last to raise a hand, and the first to put it down. He said it was a hard promise. He said many of his people had broken it, over the long history of his world. But the ones who had kept it had taught the rest. And in the end, he said, they had all learned. Even his own kind, even the humans, had finally learned. Govrak looked at him a long time. His old yellow eyes grew wet at the edges. He nodded once. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Carter knew he had finally understood. They walked back to the rover together, two slow old men in the wind, and went home. Daniel Carter died a year later, in a small house in the city of Washington, in the country of his birth. He was buried under a plain stone with only his name and his dates. There was no statue. There was no monument. He had asked for none. But the Treaty of Silent Steel still stands today. It has stood for more than 100 years. Not one weapon has been fired in galactic space in all that time. The Council still meets under its great dome on Everin. New species are still being admitted. The old hall is still warm with light. And in the back row of the Grand Assembly, in the same two seats where Daniel Carter once sat with a young lieutenant named Megan Holloway, you can still find, on any given day, at least one quiet American. They wear plain dark clothes. They carry no folder. They carry no weapon. They smile politely at the pages, and they listen, and they say very little. They are always there. They are always watching. Because in the end, the galaxy had banned every weapon it could think of. It had banned the plasma lance and the kinetic round and the neural blade. It had banned the warship and the bomb and the gun. It had been very careful. It had not missed a single tool. It had simply forgotten the species that had spent 200,000 years learning how to do without any of them. The species that did not need a tool at all. The species whose weapon could walk through 80 below in a thermal coat, and place a bare red hand on a stone table, and say in a low even voice that the next survey team would not come home. And mean it. And be believed. And never have to prove it. The galaxy had banned every weapon. Except one. And in the back row of the Grand Assembly, that one weapon was always sitting, very quietly, just watching the door.